Hello, everybody, and welcome to this first AMA of the year 2024. My name is Philippe Ozil. I'm a developer advocate at Salesforce, and I'll have the great pleasure to welcome two of our API experts here to talk about APIs. And without further ado, I would like you to introduce Kris Harrison and Jeremy Westerman. Here we go. Hello, guys. You can say hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is the typical format of our AMAs. As a reminder, we are being live streamed on LinkedIn and YouTube. You can ask your questions in there, and also, if you'd like to ask questions, you can also go and head out to the Salesforce developer community, and here's a link in case you'd like to explore it further. Everything that we're going to cover today is covered by the forward-looking statements. As a reminder, we are a publicly traded company, so please make your purchasing decisions based on what is commercially available in the product. So that's for the formalities, and now we can get ahead and start to explore our API topic today. So I believe we already have the first questions in, and I'm going to start with the first one. That is, I heard you at Dreamforce say that bulk APIs 2.0 is... Oh, sorry, actually, before I jump into the questions, I know we have a few slides. I went a bit too fast. So hold up for the questions. I'll let Jeremy explain a bit what we're going to cover today. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And again, welcome everybody. Firstly, so just got a few slides setting the scene before we jump into questions. I would ask you, please do focus your questions. Kris and myself, we are responsible and knowledgeable on APIs about accessing data on your org. These core APIs ranging from the REST, SOAP to bulk to accessing that core data. And so we're not the best for accessing APIs beyond that. There's a huge breadth of APIs at Salesforce, but we'll do our best. And we can also track down, the subject matter experts to get any answers to questions which are beyond our breadth. And likewise with Apex, we are not Apex gurus. APIs are the entry point into the platform. And executing custom Apex. So again, if you have specific Apex questions, we may have to go and hunt down the relevant person. But if your questions are very much focused upon accessing data in your org, we will take those. We probably have a wide range of people on the audience today. We probably have some beginners and some experts. So wanted to have some content for both of you. Just a quick overview of the APIs that are available to access data in your org. We range from the S-Object API, which is a synchronous REST API to work on individual objects, individual records, such as account contacts and leads and custom objects, and performing full CRUD on those, to the Query API, which is a synchronous REST resource or SOAP operation, so you can execute SOCL. With the Composite API, this provides you with more capabilities for orchestrating your calls within a single REST API call. You can combine multiple requests and sub-requests into a single call and execute those. And there are multiple different styles of composite, ranging from the basic composite to composite graph to S-objects, collections, and trees, all performing different styles of orchestration. We have the SOAP API, which is our original API. It's very much geared towards strongly typed interactions based upon the web services standards. That's a very mature and stable API. We had the bulk APIs. We have two, bulk API 2, which is the newer version, providing a simpler and more streamlined workflow for loading large quantities of data and extracting large quantities of data from the platform. And then we have the original bulk API, which provides a more batch-orientated mechanisms. But if you need to get large amounts of data in and out of your org, that is the way to go. And then we also have Apex, REST, and SOAP. Basically, you can create custom Apex code and expose that as custom REST resources and SOAP operations. And so that's just a little bit of an overview of the APIs we provide for accessing data in your org. Hopefully that helped for the beginners and new people. That helps, and just a quick overview for the more experienced. Also, just wanted to do a quick recap of what's coming in the new release, Spring 22. We do have some updates here. Firstly, those of you which have started to leverage the Salesforce integration user license, we do have a new profile coming out, the minimum access API only integrations profile. It's to address a couple of issues in the original profile, and it's based upon the minimum access profile that is already existing. We've done some behind the scenes enhancements with bulk API 2 query. We've done some optimization of the PK chunking size. So previously, when you were doing a bulk API 2 query to extract data, we would break that query down into a set of chunks based upon the primary key. Each chunk would be 250K records. And sometimes that would time out based upon, the data that you were querying, the number of fields, whether there were formula fields, etc. And so we've now done some optimizations where we will reduce that chunk size to eliminate those timeouts to execute the query. So you will be seeing some more reliable queries going forward. And in the previous release, we greatly expanded the number of entities that Bulk API 2 supports for PK chunking to the degree that we're supporting thousands of entities with PK chunking, which is far too great to document. So we've extended the get job info query API to return a new field so that when you start a query job, you can find out whether PK chunking is supported for that entity. And then finally, we do have some Apex REST updates. I won't go into details of those. They are fully release noted, but just be aware that there are some Apex REST updates. In particular, we've got the HTTP accept headers are now defaulting to JSON. That actually brings us in consistency with the rest of the platform because the rest of the platform APIs default to JSON. And so please do go and check those release notes out if you're using Apex REST. I would be remiss if I did not mention API version retirements. Please do upgrade your requests. We are moving forward with retiring versions 21 through 30 next year in the summer 25. So please do be aware of this. I put a link to the blog here, which provides mechanisms about how you can understand what API versions you are using, track down that information. But please do be aware of that. So they've got lots of runway to upgrade your requests. And then finally, do join our journey. We do have the integration group, Trailblazer community. So please do and have conversations with us there. Share your ideas with us on Ideas Exchange. And then finally, visit us at TrailX DX in San Francisco in March. I'll be speaking at 2 sessions, platform integration, what's new and what's coming. And then with Philippe, I'll be co-presenting Integrate Easily with the Salesforce Platform APIs. And then we have the Platform APIs booth. Both Kris and myself will be manning that. If you're an early bird on the first day on the Wednesday, the 7:30 slot, I will be manning that. And then the slot afterwards, Kris will be there as well. So please do come and visit us in person. And so that's a plug for TDX, Philippe.
Yes, sure. And I think I can also share a little spoiler there. I believe you mentioned you have some work going on around integration with the with profiles, and I believe there's a blog post that will be released in a couple of days that talks just about this new permissions and profiles.
Yes, that new blog I wrote with Samuel Rosen, who is the PM for identity working. He's responsible for the OAuth, and it basically describes the end-to-end steps about how to use the integration user with the OAuth client credentials flow and the new profile. Yes.
So yeah, keep tuned for this. It will come up live in a couple of days. All right, thanks for the intro. I believe we have a couple of questions in the queue now. So let's get started. The first one I had was, I heard you at Dreamforce say that Bulk API 2.0 is used to extract data from the Salesforce org to Data Cloud as well. What enhancement have been made to the Bulk API 2.0 to support this API, and what enhancements will be available to all users of the Bulk API 2.0?
Yeah, most definitely. We're doing a lot of work on Bulk API 2.0. It's driven both in the short term by Data Cloud, because every customer now gets access to Data Cloud, and as part of that onboarding onto Data Cloud, we need to get data from the org into Data Cloud, and Bulk API 2 query is used for that. And so they are driving a lot of enhancements to the overall throughput and performance of that, which will directly benefit every user. That PK chunking optimization one, which I mentioned, is the first of those, which is directly visible. We're also doing enhancements sort of behind the scenes in how we manage our concurrency and our query extract to improve that as well. And there are some more forward-looking enhancements in terms of, for example, supporting Parquet and Avro schema as possible file formats in the future. And the whole goal about that is to improve Bulk API 2 such that customers can start to migrate from the original Bulk API to Bulk API 2 with its simpler workflow plus its improved performance and throughput.
Nice. All right, let's go on with the next question from Amulia. Why does the metadata component dependency API doesn't support filtering with a ref metadata component type? No, that's a very specific question.
Yeah, I think that's a question on the dependency API. And basically, that will remain in beta at the moment as we work on the prioritization of that. An update will be shared in the Trailblazer group, and I would recommend, if you'd want further discussion on that, I'd actually have that. I'll post that within the Trailblazer community. But it is something that we're looking at for the prioritization.
Cool, thanks. All right, up next we have Ranu on YouTube. He's asking, when would Bulk API 2.0 auto retire for row lock? No, sorry, for the Bulk API 2.0, when will auto retires for row lock would come? Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the question. This is something that we're actively looking at at the moment. We do have a pilot, an automatic record lock handling pilot, which we are taking feedback from. If you're interested, please do sign up, and we are taking feedback from that. And that is something that we want to move forward and address that issue within the Bulk API 2 ingest, so that records can be ingested without encountering record locking errors. I mean, I would clarify that doesn't mean you won't get errors from ingesting data. There could still be errors. There could be other types of errors. So you should still be always plan on checking the results and checking if there are failed records for other reasons. But it will just remove the record locking errors, and it is on something that we would like to get out shortly.
All right, thanks. Another question from Merrick from YouTube. Hi, I want to create a composite API to create records in an org, but I want to know about the limits. How are they calculated? How can I thoughtfully limit my API usage?
Well, there are a number of capabilities for doing that from an API point of view. There is the limits resource, which you can make a call to get the remaining limits, the limits that you have and the remaining limits. And likewise, on every single API request you make, the response header contains the available limits remaining. If the question is, as part of your composite call, could you have logic within that orchestration, within the composite sequence, which is checking limits? I don't think that's possible.
All right.
But you could make a call to the /limits resource prior to making your composite request, and it will let you know it will return what limits you have available.
Got it. All right, switching over to LinkedIn, question from Shay. I want to use the bulk API version 1 when PK chunking wasn't supported, in big bulk API version 2 if it's supported. Should I create a job on bulk API v2, check if it's supported, and if not, close the v2 job and use v1 instead?
Well, bulk API 2 supports thousands. I think it's now about 40 or nearly 5,000 entities with PK chunking. And bulk v1 supports a much smaller subset of that. So all the entities that bulk v1 supports for PK chunking are supported for bulk v2. And so any entity will all, if you want to do PK chunking, use bulk v2. Because the range of entities is far greater.
That's a great call out. You don't have any plans to retire bulk API v1, by the way.
Our long-term strategy is to consolidate on bulk v2. We are making our enhancements there. That is our long-term investment focus. We would only move away from bulk API version 1 when bulk API 2 is on par from an outcome perspective. So when users are using bulk v1, to ingest data and to extract data, when they can achieve the same outcome, which includes both functionality and non-functional requirements like performance and throughput, when they can achieve the same outcome, that's only when we would consider that. So our long-term investment strategy is in bulk v2, but nothing is going to happen within the short to medium term.
Got it. Thanks.
And if you follow our retirement cadence, we provide ample heads up to retire a specific endpoint, versioned endpoint. So that would be the same motion by which the original bulk API is moved out of service. It would follow that deprecation phase and then ultimate retirement based on a class, a section of versions. So that would be the motion. And you can see that it takes us a while to do that.
Yeah, that makes
we keep deferring it. Yes.
Kris, it's a good segue to the next question. I know you have the answer because we've worked on a blog post to cover this. The question is, I use a number of REST API clients for integration and DevOps processes. How can I identify these different clients in my Salesforce logs?
Yeah, so there's a number of logs, API logs that are exposed through event monitoring. And with that product, you can download those logs, those events, and inspect them in whatever tool you and your organization make use of. There is one API log in particular that is free and doesn't require the full event monitoring license, and that's the API total usage log, and that provides a nice high-level view of basic information about an API call. And so that's where I would suggest you start.
Very cool. And I remember there's also a special header for your API calls, which lets you name your client, which I think is very helpful as well when you have
That's right, Salesforce call options. If you include a value in the client field for that header, that information will be persisted to those events, and it'll allow you to track the origin of the API call with free-form text. The connected app ID is there in the API total usage log for an additional point of traceability, but it's rather opaque, and you have to go back and look up the connected app information in your org, which you may want to do anyway, but the client name gives you a different level of control for identifying those calls.
Yeah, and it's clearly helpful when you have APIs that are lasting for 10 years. API clients, I mean. All right, let's move on to the next question. I know we have another one from Waranu on YouTube. Is the list of in the list of APIs, why was pubs of API not mentioned? So someone paid attention to the first slide that Jeremy presented.
Oh, Good job, Jeremy. Good slides. Well, again, the focus of that slide was to set context about a subset of APIs that our teams directly cover, which involve working with data in the org. They're not the only APIs for sure, but PubSub in particular is an API that is involved with publishing and subscribing to events, which are a different kind of data, different integration pattern. And we have and shall continue to have dedicated sessions to talk about all matters of eventing. So you're right, it is an API, just like the streaming API, but the domain that covers is in the eventing space.
Yes. All right. Next, from Cylinder on YouTube, is there going to be any capability for change capture? Well, actually, sorry, I was reading the question as we were speaking, so yeah, it was about
Consider
change.
that demand for an eventing AMA, Philippe.
Yes, yes. Okay, I'll skip this one. All right, another one, and there was another one on dependency API, but I will also skip. All right, next question from VJ on YouTube. What advantages does integration profile user provide compared to having a user whose profile has API only access enabled?
The primary benefit of the integration user is the licensing cost. So it is at a reduced licensing cost from the the typical Salesforce user. So it's primarily a licensing cost, and the goal is so that you can license a distinct user for every single integration. So if you're integrating 50 apps into Salesforce, we would recommend that those 50 apps each have their own distinct user, so that you can have better control over what they can access and the traceability and the auditability of their requests rather than sharing a user. And it's primarily a licensing. Yes, you could achieve the same outcome using just as a regular user with API only, but then you would be using a full license seat. And so it's primarily from that. There is also a different model in terms of the authorization, because with the integration user, we've adopted the go forward strategy of using perm sets. And so by default, the integration user license and profile have minimal access, and you define all of your access via a permission set with a permission set license. And so it's starting with that principle of, the minimum required. So
list privilege access, yes. And all of this will be covered in Jeremy's blog coming up next. Yep. Still on the integration topic, someone is asking, are there any plans to make the integration user setup more intuitive so that it looks a bit different on a first-time experience? So I don't know exactly what's the struggle behind this, but are there anything you'd like to say about this?
In terms of setting up the initial, when an integration user is defined, there are no major plans for enhancing that or changing that experience. So when an integration user is defined, you enter in the email, and I imagine that would be for example, the email of the admin of the remote application. So let's just say our ERP application needs to connect to Salesforce. You would set up an integration user in Salesforce. For the email, you could provide the email address of the ERP admin. When that user is created, that ERP admin would receive the email to verify that user. They would click it. They would enter their first passwords. We are working to improve how the ERP admin can reset that password and get the security token. So that's where we're focusing our enhancements on that setup experience.
Got it. Thanks.
Question. And just to add a little bit more color there, like I would offer that the introduction of this new user license and really stripped down profile from a permissions perspective last year was a big catalyst in moving or signaling the vision of moving permissions management from profiles to permission sets. And I think Cheryl Feldman has been quite active in fielding feedback on what would be what problems exist or what friction exists in putting more energy behind that permissions management in perm sets. I've heard of ideas to make that simpler, more straightforward. So we really want to follow Cheryl's lead there in drafting off of the improvements to the permission set group setup and management experience, and include those best practices, include those enhancements into the jobs to be done for setting up the permissions for integration. So I think anything that's unique to integrating with the Salesforce platform through the API that isn't necessarily covered by the assignment or the setup and the assignment of permission sets would be really interesting to dig into. But generally speaking, permission set management is something that we want to follow the broader admin experience and roadmap toward.
Thanks for the extra details. All right, I have another question on LinkedIn from Fabrice. Any chance that we can run the tooling SQL query with GraphQL in the future? I know your team is not exactly working on GraphQL, so I don't know if it's a question we can field.
I mean, we can field it. We just did, Philippe. You asked the question. We have good relationships with the team that owns the GraphQL API. We can pass that request along to them. I'd be surprised if they would say it's not possible. It'd just be a matter of prioritization and getting that connection to those APIs to be exposed in the same data pattern that they are through that the rest of the non-tooling accessed objects happen to be. Now, I do believe that there is a direct connection between what's accessible through the GraphQL API and those that are available through the UI API. So that may continue to still be a requirement or a prerequisite for GraphQL access. So just keep that in mind. The GraphQL and UI APIs are purpose-built to drive UI-based experiences. So if that tooling API access has a UI component to it, then that would help drive some of that prioritization and decision-making.
Yeah. And I believe the team is still working on mutations for the GraphQL API at this point. So there's still an open beta going on. All right, next question from VJ on YouTube. Any recommendation of open source integration frameworks or frameworks that can help you interact with our platform? That's kind of a very open question.
I'm not able to recommend any specific client-based framework you'd want to use.
Yeah,
I do love VS Code and Salesforce's extensions. And find that that's a really helpful IDE and ecosystem to draw from. In terms of frameworks, I mean, I would look to the open source community for the programming languages that you happen to be familiar with and working with, and experiment and make your choice based on your personal preferences and what you're trying to accomplish.
Definitely. So yeah, the programming language is definitely, I think, the first question to ask. If you're going for JavaScript, I can recommend JSForce, and after that, you'll have to find the correct one, I would say. There's no... Salesforce as a company does not provide directly the framework, so you will have to pick your own from the community and from open source communities. All right, moving on to the next questions. Abdul on LinkedIn is asking, hi, are there any limits on the number of callouts you can make? Well, there are limits on inbound API calls, but there are no documented numbers on so interns or maximum callouts. So if you like, I think it's about like Apex REST endpoints, I think. Is there a number of receiving?
So there is a topic in the quick reference for limits that's focused on Apex callouts that you can study. Ultimately, it's going to depend on which part of the platform that the callout is initiated from. So if, for example, the callout is starting from or invoked from a flow, the flow experience is going to have some control over that that call out and receiving the response. So you'll just want to study the help and training or developer guide for the specific area of platform where the call out originates from, and be mindful of the underlying or explicit limits that are associated with that integration.
Got it. Question again from Waranu on YouTube. When reading fields and records from Salesforce, does API support fields all without specifying the fields one by one? So that's a SOQL query, I believe.
Yes, we do. Yes, we support that, and it's I prefer people just do the SOQL documentation. It's fully documented, and we have that.
Yeah, very convenient. Just be mindful not to request extra data when you don't need it.
Yeah.
It's always preferable to name the fields you need because we can check for dependencies when you break things. All right. Another question from Andrew on YouTube. When will the integration user support the ability to log in as an admin, click buttons to schedule job, and do off setup? Many apps require this and it's still a pain to do it. Okay.
I think the question is, would the integration user support the ability to log in as an admin? Well, the goal of the focus of the integration user is to enable non-Salesforce applications to connect to Salesforce in a headless manner using our REST and SOAP APIs, not to log in and as UIs to perform functionality. And so that isn't a target use case for the Salesforce integration user license. It's very much geared towards this headless interaction via APIs. So there are no plans at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. Another question from Fabrice on LinkedIn. Could we dream to have execute Apex anonymous code as any user? Okay, I see. It's a similar request to the test mode run as, but with our APIs. Would it be possible to simulate an API call on behalf of another user, even with a rollback at the end? He mentioned. Is that something you ever considered?
I mean, if this is a specific call about running Apex, we'd probably have to speak with the Apex team and get back to them. We don't have any specific plans regarding the integration user to do run as beyond what the base platform supports.
Yeah, I think I already heard these questions in the past, and I think that could be perceived as a way to bypass a security mechanism. So I don't think it will happen. But yes, feel free. We can ask the Apex team. Another question from Amul on YouTube. Is anything going to change in the Composite API, or any updates that are planned for the Composite API?
No, there's nothing changed recently, so there's no new functionality. We do have some capabilities in the backlog, which I'd like to get across the line for GA on the Tree API. The Tree API today supports save, so you can save a tree of records. We would like to extend that to be a full CRUD API, so you can do read, updates, and deletes. We have that work in a good state. We just need to get that over the line, so I'm trying to prioritize that. I did talk about that, I believe, at was it Dreamforce a year or so ago. But yes, that's probably the next change within the Composite family is those additions to the Tree API. So it would become a full CRUD API.
Thanks. Another question on LinkedIn from Jason. Hi, Jason. I believe integration user license is not currently able to have to cover metadata permissions. Is that correct? And if yes, are there any plans to allow this at some point? And the reason why Jason is asking this is that he's thinking about use cases where a DevOps tool may need API access.
Yeah, because integration is a new user license, we need to work with the various teams throughout Salesforce to make sure that their parts of the platform are licensable to work with the integration user license. It's based upon their specific business goals, whether that you want that functionality to work with the API integration user. Some teams do, some teams don't. But we're working through that. So I will have to follow up with the metadata team and get an answer back on if they plan to do that and when.
Got it. Right. Another question. I think you already covered this, but maybe make sure that you did. From Shay on LinkedIn, is there a way to know in advance if an object supports PK chunking or not on bulk API v2 before creating the query job?
What was that? Sorry again, Philip?
The question was, is there a way to know in advance if an object supports PK chunking on the
No.
bulk API v2 before creating the query job?
No, you have to create the query job first, and once you've created the query job, you can then run that get info API call to get the job info. I mean, if you're looking to understand whether a particular entity supports PK chunking, I would assume that you would first do that in a sandbox environment, and so you would just have to do that once. But because of the large number of APIs we're now supporting, there's 4,800 which is support PK chunking. We just can't document it all, and so that's just the optimal way is via an API call. So, yeah.
I'd also love to know why that information is of interest. Like, what are you planning to do with that knowledge? Yeah, that'd be helpful to reflect on.
Yeah, Shay, feel free to complement your question. All right, we'll move on to another one in the meantime. I see another one from Marano on YouTube. Is there an API to pull egress data from one Salesforce org and push it to another org? And in a way that you could persist parent-child relationships for data seeding, for example. So imagine you have to prepare a sandbox, I guess. That's the typical use case this person is thinking about. How would you do this?
Well, with sandboxes, you can do the copy from the production to create the sandbox, but there isn't a direct capability to sync data from one org to another org. So that capability doesn't exist. But there are the APIs. Each org has its own APIs, so you could certainly build something which could leverage the APIs to extract the data and insert it into the target org.
Yeah, that's just an application that doesn't necessarily exist. There are, I'm sure, plenty of vendors out there on the App Exchange that could support that use case and support that orchestration. Another option to consider is the cross-org adapter in the Salesforce Connect product that would link up two orgs together. It wouldn't necessarily move data back and forth, but you may be able to achieve the same outcomes without having to do all that data movement. So look into Salesforce Connect.
Yeah, so that would be replication. So yeah, without replication. All right. All right. Keep the questions coming up. I see a little pause in the questions, but we still have a few to cover. Andrew on YouTube is asking, to have outbound calls run as an integration user, we have to set the user to full SF. I don't know if it's a question, actually. I'm reading this thing and sorry, I'll skip this one because I'm not sure it's a question. Sorry, Andrew, if you can reformulate a bit the question. I didn't get it.
We may just have Jeremy have an AAA and ask Andrew.
All right. So I'll move on to another one from Sanjay on YouTube. Is there any way to get a list of all the required fields of any object with an API?
Describe.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. Using the metadata API?
Yep.
Or even the tooling?
Yeah, another way to get that information is to look at the OpenAPI document for the S objects. We have a beta for that feature, so look into the beta for OAS for S objects and see how that might help you out as well.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, I'll check what do we have. A question about the Connect API. It's been some time I haven't talked about this one. Why does the Connect API use a per hour hourly rate limit?
Why it does, I can't really speak to why it uses a per hourly rate. I'm assuming that's how it was created when it was done when it was first created. But there are certainly active plans to move from the Connect API, which includes GraphQL direct access, to move it away from that hourly rate and roll it under the org's daily API limit, so that there would be a single limit for all of those APIs. And so there are those active plans, and the team responsible for the Connect API, they're hoping to do that by summer 24 or winter 25 to have made that change. Because they find at the moment, there's a lot of apps which are restricted by that hourly rate. And this will therefore remove that hourly limit restriction. And there'll just be that one limit for both Connect APIs and, normal regular APIs you're using today. I should point out that Chatter doesn't apply to that. Chatter will be limited by the hourly rate.
Good answer. Thanks. All right, let's see another question. Keep up the questions coming. When using the bulk API, I have to poll to see if my job is finished. It would be better if you published an event when a job was finished. Is there any integration that is planned with eventing APIs?
Yes, on this we actually have an internal pilot going on with Data Cloud on this. We like to run our big new features internally to make sure, just in terms of solidifying those. But we have, for query, we have this capability where when you run a query, bulk API 2, the result, as each result set is available, it would produce a partial download event with a URL, which you can download that result set. And when the job is complete, it will produce a job completion event. And so we are hoping to GA that later this year. So that would be for the query side. So that would be an eventing mechanism. And the nice thing about the partial download events is you don't have to wait until the job has fully completed before you can start downloading the result sets. So that will also speed up the download. And then once we've GA'd that, we'll turn our attention to ingest and produce equivalent capabilities on the ingest side. But again, that's both forward-looking. But the query is, we're running that in-house, and once we're comfortable with that, we will GA that.
All right, thanks. Another question on LinkedIn from Jeffrey. What is the status of that Open API documentation generator beta? Do you have a target release GA date where you're looking forward to add before GA?
Yes, I'm hoping to get that prioritized this year. We have sort of two phases. One is to GA the existing beta capabilities, including the customer feedback scope to the scope of the beta. So please do go to the community. And then beyond that, we would expand that to all S-object resources. And so I'm pushing from a prioritization to have both of those done this year. So yes, I recognize it's an important need to get those OAS capabilities out.
Thanks. So Andrew is coming back on YouTube, and he's asking, well, he's saying integration user supports login as admin. So I'm kind of surprised. And he's saying it works great, and you can view classic, but you can't switch to line experience. Is it intentional? Is it working as designed?
Yes, I'm familiar with that. It's where the admin can log in or run as or log in as the integration user. So it's rather than the integration user just logging straight in to the UI, you log in as the admin and then do a login as. No, that's not really intended to behave like that, because with the integration user, it's intended for, as I mentioned, the headless API style of interaction. And also the profile doesn't support, or the user profile doesn't support a lot of the page layouts, etc., because it's not geared towards UL style of interactions. So yeah, we do have to have a look into that in a little bit more detail. But no, it's not intended for that.
Got it. Thanks. All right, I see.
Yeah, and just to build on that, like it would be really useful to understand what types of checks or validations are taking place in that situation. We talked about the setup of that user's permissions, but afterwards, what kinds of validations are envisioned to take place, for which folks have been accustomed to using the UI for some of those steps. What should that look like in a purely headless and API only context? And where are there gaps in the platform or the ecosystem that we need to be considerate of, and avoid the temptation of leaning on unsupported or undocumented features that get some but not all the way there. So Andrew, it'd be great to set up some time to talk more about what you're trying to do there, and where we might build the right thing instead of trying to fix the thing that's not quite working right.
Awesome. Thanks, Kris. We have time for one last question, and I see that Sanjay on YouTube is asking, when using the API, we can control remotes. No, for APIs, we have to add remote site settings. So I think that's for outbound calls. Is there any feature on the release in the future to add I'm going to rephrase this. Is there any feature to automatically add remote sites when you have deployments?
This for outbound calls?
No, I don't think there's any plans to remove any friction from setting up cores or remote site settings. I'd want to be really careful about anything to do with those security settings. Consider every step to be very much intentional and purposeful, and removing anything out of that workflow could have some unintended consequences.
Yeah, we've been here for some time already, and yeah, I don't think we'll change this. All right, thank you so much, Jeremy and Kris. It was intense. If you still have questions, remember that you can ask them on the Trailblazer community. We have a number of groups, and we'll have resources online or our different pages. So thanks again for being our experts with us. And you can continue to engage with us on our various social media channels. This is, sorry, not this one. This is, come on, I'm gonna get it. This one, sorry. This is all of our different social media. So I want to thank you so much for joining us, and it was a great pleasure. And next month we'll be looking at another session of our AMA. Thanks everyone, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.